Hi there, I'm Trevor Cox, Professor of Acoustic Engineering at the University of Salford, and today I'm going to be talking about storytelling and engineering. Now, as the author Philip Pullman once said, after nourishment, shelter and companionship, stories are the things we most need in the world. Unfortunately, engineering often fails to tell its story very well, and this is one of the reasons many people don't understand what an engineer is and what an engineer does. And this sparked the idea of Inventive, a podcast that mixes fact and fiction to explore new ways of telling the story of engineering. Let's start by looking at the portrayal of engineering on television as we currently see. Now, TV producers seem to be obsessed by size. Just look at this selection of programmes: Engineering Giants, Mega Engineering, Superstructures. Stuart Jeffries wrote a really witty takedown of this type of programme in The Guardian. He reviewed Richard Hammond's new programme, Big, a grotesquely ill-advised series. In later episodes, Hammond will go up big buildings, pilots big ships, and other examples of overcompensations for male inadequacy. Now, these sort of programmes perpetuate the misunderstanding that engineering is all about heavy engineering and big structures, work that is undertaken in hard hats with a high-vis jacket and by blokes. But engineering is much more widespread than that. Take one of our guests on the podcast, Shruk El Atta. She's a refugee, drag belly dancer and an electronic engineer. She works on Femtech, technology to help females. Tell us a little bit about what you do in engineering at the moment. You work for LV? What's your day job like?
Yes. So I work in Femtech. Femtech means making technology primarily for women, but the tech I make helps cisgender women, transgender men, and basically anybody who has given birth or has this sort of anatomy. So I'm making things like silent breast pumps. It took more than 160 years to realize that people who breastfeed do not want to be treated like dairy cows, or pelvic floor trainers. But before that, I worked in industrial robotics. So I worked on robots that can measure things as small as a single nanometer, which is 60,000 times thinner than the width of a human hair. I've built a machine that can detect things like cancer based on electron quantum spin. I made a system that can help with eye surgery. So I worked with eye surgeons on the system, actually. And I think being an engineer just means you can do whatever you want. I built a car and raced it.
I like your description of LV and how you're working on these really important things, but it's not such a glamorous side of engineering, is it?
I've heard that before, and I've actually heard it from myself. So actually, I was approached for this role that I'm in now. I remember kind of being reluctant to take it because I thought that the tech at Femtech is not going to be as technologically advanced. And this is something that I felt I was unconsciously biased against. And just as a society, whenever it's something that has to do with women or women's health, we devalue it. And I feel like there's a lot of unconscious biases when we start talking about things like Femtech and we think they're not as technologically advanced or not as exciting. So I think we need to kind of unpick what we think when Femtech comes up, for example. And also, like, I know that when these products were trying to find funders, some of the funders wouldn't touch it. They're like, oh, that's disgusting. Like, why would I touch something like that?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I've come across this before. Technologies which are dealing with essentially some effects of aging, but I'd never thought about the the female bias in that as well.
Yeah. But it's also because it's a taboo, like people don't talk about it. So like the women who will suffer from incontinence don't know that it's something that's going to happen to them until it does because people don't talk about it. And we're talking about millions of people around the world. It's a huge issue. We don't talk about it because it's taboo, because it's a women's issue.
This is just one example of how we interact with science and medicine through engineering. Often what is called science in the media is actually engineering. Let's go to another TV trope, things going wrong and engineering failure. Here's the IMDb summary of the programme Engineering Catastrophes, to profile, investigate, analyse and find solutions for the world's most unbelievable engineering blunders. Can you imagine a series being commissioned which go around showcasing scientific blunders or artistic blunders? I mean, maybe if we made the latter one, we could feature Beer the Bang, a sculpture by Tom Heathwick that marked the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. It had to be dismantled because it became unsafe. It got nicknamed Sea of the Clunk by locals because spikes kept falling off, one of which nearly impaled a double-decker bus. But we don't make a programme called Artistic Blunders because they're rare, and our engineering blunders are similarly not that common. In engineering, we should be marvelling at how skillful engineers are at avoiding such catastrophes. Why can't we tell positive stories? Here's one of the inventive engineers who helps with rescue missions when natural disasters strike.
So, hello, my name is Joshua Makabuag. I'm a chartered structural engineer. I used to work as a design engineer, designing buildings in the UK, the Middle East, and other countries.
So I've also heard you described as a search and rescue engineer. What's that? I've never heard of that discipline before.
Yeah, it's fairly unusual, but I went to the Japan tsunami with something called the Earthquake Engineering Field Investigation Team. And that essentially led me down the path of becoming what I call a disaster risk engineer. So that basically means using, in my case, it's structural engineering because that's my professional background for the mitigation of disaster risk. So the humanitarian aspect would come into things like search and rescue, which is one of the things that I do. And there are different types of search and rescue. So my particular work is in urban search and rescue, which means finding people trapped in collapsed buildings and safely getting them out of the building. The role of the engineer in urban search and rescue is in trying to understand the least dangerous way to access and to extricate and pull out the casualty. So when you have a collapsed building, that's a very dangerous thing. It's just a big pile of very heavy things that can move and fall and cause a lot of harm to the people inside and the people outside. And so your role as the engineer is to figure out the least dangerous way to get into that building or that rubble pile and get the people out.
I mean, that sounds to me quite difficult because I can imagine if you're designing a bridge that people are building to your plans in some way, that things are going to turn out in a quite nice ordered way. But when you go to a building, presumably it collapses in a myriad of different ways and your structures are not as neat and tidy. There's no blueprints for you to work from of what the building is once it's collapsed.
That's exactly right, yeah. So it's a very different mindset from the role of a design engineer. So a more typical engineering role would be someone has a concept for a building or a bridge or a stadium or some other form of structure, and then you figure out the way to make that idea stand up in the real world using real materials, columns, beams, steel, concrete, etc. Then your main job really after defining how to carry those weights and loads is to think of all the things that could go wrong, how your building might crack or fail or move or subside, and then think about ways to mitigate those risks, so to stop that from happening. And that's how you design your building. That might sag too much. Okay, well, let's make that stronger. This column's in the wrong place. Okay, let's move it, but then that's going to cause other problems. Let's deal with those. The mindset for search and rescue engineering is a little bit different because, as you say, you don't really have very much information other than what you have in front of you. The other big difference is whereas a design might take months or even years, you don't really have any time to find out much more than what you have in front of you. So if there's somebody trapped inside a collapsed building, then you'll have minutes to decide the best way to access and extricate those people. And you don't really have anything other than what you can see with your eyes. And the ways that you can try to approach that problem is you want to get as much information as possible. So, you'll go around the structure, you'll take in as much information as you can. And when you're doing that, you're really trying to assess the past, present, and future of the structure. So what I mean there is when you have a collapsed building, just picture a big rubble pile of collapsed slabs and beams and roofs and a bit of a mess. Your first thought should be, are there any victims inside and where are they likely to be? Because that's where you need to focus your attention. And then for the structure, it's what did that building look like originally? So it was a 3-story building made of reinforced concrete. It stood over here. Now it's collapsed and it's ended up over here. The collapse has likely been, from what we can see, it looks like it might be a failure of the ground floor columns on the west side, which has caused it to topple. And all that information tells you, okay, what it's made of, where it's moved to, which gives you information on where people are likely to be, etc. But also then to think about what would happen next. So if this was to fail further, Could that slab that's there resting on that wall, could that wall fail and could it move further? If that was to move further, would that crush the people underneath? What can we do about that? Can we avoid that risk? Can we remove it? Can we mitigate it, or can we monitor that risk? So yes, it's very different from your typical design structural engineering, but they very much lead on from one another.
There are other problems with the portrayal of engineering, such as a lot of it being about historic stuff. Now, I'm a big fan of history, but this constant looking back to Victorian times overlooks the fact that engineering will continue to shape our lives and society into the future. It's one of the big drivers that shapes how we live our lives. So, with all these problems about portrayal, what are we doing about this on Inventive?
The Inventive Podcast, mixing engineering fact and fiction, with Trevor Cox, Professor of Acoustic Engineering at the University of Salford.
The idea is simple. I interview an engineer, we pass that conversation on to a writer and commission them to write an imagined story inspired by it. The result? Fascinating engineering tales, mixing fact and fiction.
My name is Shrukalata, engineer by day, belly dancer by night.
There is a child sitting in the middle of the circuit board. A child formed in Egypt, but not of Egypt, not of anywhere.
24/7 refugee. Nice to meet you.
That's inventive.
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 Please subscribe to the Inventive Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love you to like, comment and share. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Just search for the Inventive Podcast.
We've already met a couple of the engineers I interviewed, Shruck and Joshua, so what did our writers do with their stories? For Shruck, who currently works on Femtech, we commissioned a piece by award-winning writer and poet Tanya Hirschman. Now, Tanya produced a beautiful piece of hybrid writing combining fiction, poetry and non-fiction. It's called Human Being as Circuit Board, Human Being as Dictionary. Now, Tanya does something beautiful and poetic with imagery, Human Being as Circuit Board. She also explores language, Human Being as Dictionary. This is a story about Shruck and her journey and builds to a climax and a final scene that you would never get in a normal interview podcast. But some of the pieces are about what the engineers do. This is the case for the story written about Joshua, the search and rescue engineer. We teamed up with writer Nina Allen for this one, who was named one of the 50 writers you should read now by The Guardian. Her piece Forces and Load could have had the tagline, "An engineer goes back to help in a disaster, but he's been there before." Now, in a disaster movie, we have a hero. That's a very familiar trope, but the hero often isn't an engineer. It's important to say here that Joshua himself wouldn't say he was a hero. This is a fictional extrapolation. Engineering is really nicely woven into the narrative, but the piece is really about what happened to the character's dad. This is what we get on Inventive. We go beyond the interviews, we get stories that really engage, while also correctly portraying what real engineers do. The idea of an engineer as a hero, activist or disruptor actually appears in a few of the Inventive stories. C.M. Taylor wrote a piece titled The Night Builder, inspired by structural engineer Roma Agrawal. This includes a Banksy-like figure who works with concrete. Engineer as a disruptor isn't a trope, but it should be because engineering has a huge influence on everyone's lives. To take just one small example in my field, acoustics, we recently had the death of Lou Otens, the Dutch engineer who invented the audio cassette. Obituaries appeared in the main sections of newspapers because it was such an important invention which revolutionised how we all consumed music at the time. Now, one thing that really annoys me about the portrayal of engineering on television is the use of false jeopardy. They like to build things up as though a catastrophe is going to happen, or the bridge might fall down, when we know in fact that in most cases in engineering that doesn't happen because a huge amount of effort has gone into making sure it doesn't happen. Of course, jeopardy is very important for storytelling, but it has to be convincing, and we see that in our fictional pieces. Emma Newman is a science fiction and fantasy writer and who's been shortlisted for numerous awards. Now, she did a work inspired by Greg Bowie, who makes trauma plates to treat broken bones. Her piece, Healing the Fractured, is set in a dystopian future. It reminded me a bit of Handmaid's Tale. and we have an engineer as an unexpected hero. The engineering hero is going to use a trauma plate to smuggle something into the US against the authorities. Believable jeopardy is in this great short story, but like all the works written for us, they also make you think about engineering. One thing I don't think we talk enough about is the ethics of engineering, and we explore this in a few of the Inventive episodes. Now, a common engineering issue, which is about ethics, is unintended consequences. Just because you can create a technology, should you do so? This is what is explored in a story we're going to hear in a moment, but first we need to meet the engineer who inspired that story. She's Ruth Amos, and she does amazing stuff getting kids excited about engineering through a YouTube channel called Kids Invent Stuff. But she also has a really inspiring personal story, including engineering a stair lift to help people with physical disability. Here's Ruth.
Kids Invent Stuff is a YouTube channel which is run by me and my friend Sean, and we wanted to show and engage and encourage more young people into science, technology, engineering, arts and maths. Both of us grew up in deprived areas. We understand that, not everyone has all this kit at their fingertips, and so we wanted anyone to be able to interact with the channel. It's great to have all these amazing technology-filled STEM outreach work, but actually if parents are struggling to pay for their child to be able to eat, then going on about all this wonderful tech doesn't help them. And we wanted to show them how exciting and interesting inventing and designing is and how it affects the world around us. So we set up a YouTube channel where every month we bring to life a different kids' invention idea. So it could be a fire and water shooting piano, or a furry electric dog car, or a popcorn firing doorbell. And they are all inventions designed by 4 to 11-year-olds. And then we film ourselves bringing them to life and testing them in crazy ways.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching some of those this morning. I was rather taken by to lower the tone, the farting staircase, because I work in acoustic engineering, and there's this video which did the rounds a few years ago of a musical staircase. This was a staircase which when you walked and it played tunes. And the idea there was to encourage people to walk up the stairs and not use the escalators. I wondered, do you think the farting staircase would have a similar sort of kind of effect?
I think if you were 5 or 6 years old, then definitely. In fact, as an adult, I really liked it. We did tweak them slightly because the great thing about the way that the stairs were built is that you could make them play any noises. The stairs worked by adding pads onto your existing stairs, so you could make them at home and you could make your stairs, play musical instruments, say your name, count as you run up and down them. And in fact, the way that soundboard works, we've used for a number of our invention ideas, because it's a really clever way to make an invention have sounds in a really nice and relatively simple way. So the great thing about that project in particular is that is definitely one that you could go away and try at home.
It's good solid engineering, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
You've got something to try and make, and how do you do it?
One of the main things that sticks out as my experiences in engineering and inventing was seeing something that I had designed come to life. The first time that I saw that, it was in a factory. I wasn't physically making it. But I know how important those moments are, seeing something that you've drawn or designed come to life. And so Sean and I do feel the pressure as well of kind of doing the invention justice. And so there's the problem solving of how do we make this thing work? How are we going to make this saxophone fire eco glitter? How are we going to make this triple bath? But then there's also the other side of it of we don't ever want any of the inventors that submit an invention idea to feel like we've not done their invention justice.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk there about seeing something realised. I work both as a scientist and engineer, and science is great. You get these papers where you've made new knowledge, but there's nothing quite like seeing. I remember walking around a factory and seeing there are, in my case, these acoustic treatments that are going to go into a concert hall and make it sound better. And it's just an amazing feeling to see something that you've had conceptually on a computer or in a mind, and then there is the physical device which is going to change people's lives.
Definitely. And for me, it was a real moment of I, before that point, always thought that it was special people that designed and invented things. And here was something that I had designed being made. And that was just such a pivotal moment on my journey into engineering. So that's something that Sean and I want to give the next generation and show them that, no, you can really shape the future. I know we're talking about jam firing rockets, but actually all of the things around you have been made and designed by engineers. And, you know, here's an invention that was designed by a young person just like you.
I think that's really important in engineering, because you talk about the creative industries, you think of the arts, but it's actually making something engineering is a very creative process, isn't it? You can't just magic it out without some creativity.
Oh, definitely. And problem solving, being creative with solutions, that's a massive part of engineering. And I love problem solving. And when we talk to people about engineering, we have to talk about how creative it is. We have to talk about how we're solving problems, because I think sometimes that gets missed out when young people are learning about engineering. They don't realise how exciting it is. And that's one of the reasons that actually Sean and I were really keen to talk about inventing, because engineering along the way has kind of morphed and changed into lots of different things. So if you say the word engineer to anyone, a child, an adult, they will think of very different things. Maybe they're quite practical, maybe they're not. You know, it can be someone that works at a computer, it can be someone who fixes things. There are so many different aspects to it that can be really hard to explain that to a 5-year-old and try and get them engaged, particularly girls, to show them that they have a really exciting role to play within this industry. Whereas if you talk to them about inventing, that is about problem solving, being creative, all these things that they love. And so that's something we found has been much easier engaging young people in engineering and STEM by talking about inventing rather than just talking about engineering.
You've actually followed quite an unconventional route. I guess many people would be assuming, for example, that you went to university, but you didn't.
Yeah, and I think I'm so passionate about people finding out if a career for STEM is for them is because I very nearly missed out on this career that I love. Through secondary school, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I wanted to go to university. And it was only through a teacher setting me a problem as part of my resistant materials coursework, a subject that I took mainly because I went to a technology college and I had to. That was kind of a key moment. I designed a mobility product that helps people be able to walk up and down their stairs, won an engineering award, got thrown into this whole world of engineering at 16 and found that I loved it and ended up starting a business, didn't end up going to university, but started to design, invent. It was only once I'd won the engineering award and started to meet all these incredible female engineers, and I was like, oh, maybe I want to be an engineer. Maybe I could be an engineer. I pretty much on a daily basis think how bored and frustrated I would be if I'd have been a lawyer.
Yeah, each their own, I guess. I mean, the thing is, you skirted over there. You know, you made something, a mobility aid.
It was to help my teacher's father, who'd had a stroke, so couldn't use his stairs. He wasn't able to get a stair lift, and so my teacher set me the problem to design something that would allow him to walk up and down his stairs. If I'm honest, at that particular moment, part of me was like, oh, I don't know anything about stairs. Is this really that interesting? But the more I started to research, and when I went home and looked into the problem, and that no one had really designed something that was, I always think of it as like a walker or a Zimmer frame for the stairs. And there wasn't any products like that out there at that point. And so, yeah, that it kind of threw me into this crazy world of engineering and business and bringing a product to market and prototyping and all sorts of things that were just amazing skills to learn on the way. You know, things about patenting a product, marketing a product, working with manufacturers. Yeah, it was an incredible learning journey.
It's great to hear your story. If I was to grant you a superpower, what would you go for?
Oh, I would love to be able to fly. Hands down, yeah. I mean, Richard Browning has created this amazing gravity suit, and I would love to have a go. To be able to fly would be amazing.
Yeah.
That was an easy one. I was like, yeah, I want to fly.
I noticed you made some social distancing wings, but I guess they didn't allow you to take off. They were a lot of fun.
They were a lot of fun. Yeah, unfortunately, they didn't allow me to fly. They could potentially act a bit more like a glider if you went to the top of a hill. I don't know. I suppose humans have always been interested in flight, haven't they? And there is something particularly inspiring about personal flight.
I mean, the wings you made were quite magnificent, even if they didn't fly. There was these big, 2 metre wide, I guess, in full span, these big red feathers. They're like giant parrot wings or something, aren't they? But they're huge. It's a bit like Angels of the North, but out of feathers.
It was just a really nice, creative project. Making wings is not a new thing, but I really liked the challenge of having something that folded out if someone got close to you. There's so much engineering that goes into it, and it was like the perfect project of kind of a mix of engineering, but also being a bit more creative and kind of crafty almost with stuff.
I mean, they were truly magnificent. I really enjoyed watching that video.
The only thing I didn't quite think through is that 2 meters is quite big. So a lot of my front rooms were taken up by these big wings. It's almost a project that kind of got away with me.
And in Inventive, we work with an author to create a piece of fiction around your story. And we're working with Jacqueline Yallop on this one. She's worked on critically acclaimed novels, been longlisted for the Booker, but also written non-fiction. What do you think about having an author write a bit of your story or your journey?
I think it's such an honour. I love reading, and it's one of the key things that I do to switch off from everything. And I think that there is something so powerful about being able to tell a story and to get people to think differently. And yeah, it's amazing that she is spending the time to write a piece on me.
One of the things Ruth's engineered in Kids Invent Stuff are these giant wings to ensure social distancing. It's this inspired author Jacqueline Yallop to write a piece called Swish. Jacqueline is the author of 3 critically acclaimed novels and 2 works of non-fiction. She's been longlisted for the Booker Prize more than once. Here is an extract from the beautifully written Swish.
2 weeks later, at the fitting, capital F, the man said, "Stretch your arms, stretch them right out." Her wings unfurled with the easy rustle of feathers, a whisper of the mountains. Swish. Mina looked at herself in the mirror, a small brown nub nestled in the new weight frame, a bug, a larva, an unready bird. The website guide had suggested black was the most practical colour for wings, and white the most popular. But pink had been the right choice. Crisp packet, sucky sweet pink of old ballet dresses and celebration saris. Her wings drip-rustled, mirror-spangled pink, and the man leant forwards and said, "Any places where they rub? Any niggly bits? Now's the time to say." She raised and lowered her arms. The wings braced, spanning her 2 meters into the grey-brown room of needles and spanners and bones, carving clearance into the workshop so that the man stood back, giving her up to the safety of distance. "I'd get used to them in the park first, if I were you," he said. "We've had a few issues with supermarkets. Nothing to worry about, just, you know. You didn't catch the bus here, did you?" "No," Mina said. "Good. That can be a right palaver." Her wings shivered, trembled in the cleft of her shoulders, shivered with the sound of breeze through bare branches, trembled with the jitter of new leaves. There was a website, the man explained, with details of preening routines. Aftercare, capital A. "Keep the joints oiled," he advised, "so you can fold them up and down nicely when you don't want them sticking out like that." Then the doors rolled open like clouds peeling from the horizon, and he released her. "Just take care on windy days," he said. In the flat grass, sand pit, flea pit, flat grey air in the park, the wings swished long dreams of pink days, holding Mina in 2 meters of safe distance. She took the centre of the path. Bike boys and scooters dodged her. The roller skates and prams and the old couple with the red collar dog parted, retreated, breath untangled, intentions skidding on the wet winter grass. 2 men with tattoos tugged hands in the feathers, fist grip pink, shoved. But the wings were as strong as the swirling currents of the mountains. The wings were fearless, defiant, and the men went away. Swish. Mina loved her wings, the flip-flap fold of the primaries and the strong-arm sweep of the humerus. She trip-flap flew the narrow wall by the cemetery, hopped the lines on the zebra crossing, watched the others, quick and light, drifting through the park to school, to work, to the shops and home again. Nimble cut-air manoeuvres, black wings on black suits, white wings over overcoats, quick flick aviary dances, flutter feathers, a constant whisper of wishes. She nodded back to these others, tipped her wings, as if she'd been born into the flock. In fog, Mina's wings beaconed. In heavy rain, the pink dye drip ran, trailing her. When it was breezy, the wings sang of places she'd never been. At night, the dark roosted among her feathers.
If you want to hear more of these fascinating stories and these wonderful engineers, then please subscribe to the Inventive Podcast at www.inventivepodcast.com. Goodbye.